Leave now. Someone reported you don't belong here. The words echoed through the crowded graduation hall directed at a black father, a former U.S. Marine who stood frozen in disbelief. What followed left the entire auditorium speechless. The auditorium at Washington Memorial High School in Virginia was packed that June morning. The sky outside was a clear blue with banners and flags fluttering in celebration. Inside, the sound of brass instruments filled the room, accompanied by the buzz of family and friends taking their seats for the long-anticipated graduation ceremony. At the far back, a black man in his late 40s walked in quietly, wearing a plain black polo shirt and khaki pants. In his hands were a small bouquet of flowers and a folded invitation with his son's name printed on it. Jalen Blackwell, honors graduate. His name was Marcus Blackwell, a former U.S. Marine Corps sergeant who had just returned from his final deployment in Okinawa. With 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan under his belt, Marcus had lived through the worst of war. He had earned a Bronze Star, survived IED attacks, and carried fellow soldiers through gunfire. And yet he had never sought recognition. Today he just wanted to witness his son graduate. Marcus quietly found a seat near the back of the auditorium and sat down, trying not to draw attention. But before he could even settle in, 2 men in black uniforms appeared from the side aisle. Their earpieces and clipped radios marked them as event security. They walked swiftly and with purpose right toward Marcus. One of the guards, a tall white man with a buzz cut, leaned down and said in a low but firm voice, "Sir, I need you to leave immediately. Someone reported that you don't belong here." Marcus blinked. "I beg your pardon, I'm a parent. My son is graduating today." The other guard stepped in, his arms crossed. "Sir, we were given a directive. You're not listed in the VIP registry. If you don't comply, we'll have to escort you out." Marcus frowned, confused but calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the printed invitation with his son's name and the school's seal. "This is my son's big day. I have every right to be here." But their expressions didn't soften. Their posture didn't change. Around them, a few nearby guests had turned their heads. Some whispered, others just watched. A middle-aged white man seated 2 rows up nudged his wife and whispered, "I think he might have snuck in or something." Marcus felt the heat rising in his chest. His throat tightened. He had faced snipers, insurgents, and ambushes in the deserts of Fallujah, but this humiliation stung deeper. This wasn't an enemy. This was home, his own country, and he was being treated like a threat in the very place where his son was about to walk the stage. He stood slowly, not wanting to cause a scene. He thought of Jalen and how much this moment meant to both of them. If he had to step outside to avoid ruining the day, so be it. His pride would survive it. He'd survived worse. But just as Marcus took a single step toward the aisle, a shift occurred. From the front row, the VIP section, 4 men stood up in unison. They were dressed in sleek black suits, but there was no mistaking the way they carried themselves. Their posture was straight eyes alert, shoulders squared. These were not ordinary guests. One of them, a silver-haired white man with a scar running down his left cheek, called out in a voice that carried across the hall, "You're making a mistake." All eyes turned toward him. Another stepped forward, his voice firmer. "You're asking the man who saved our lives in Helmand Province to leave the ceremony." The guards froze. A third man, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped between Marcus and the guards. "This man is a war hero. He pulled 3 of us out of a burning vehicle while under Taliban fire, and you're treating him like an intruder." The fourth reached into his coat pocket, not for a weapon, but for a small navy pin, which he flashed briefly toward the security team. "We're retired SEAL Team 6, and we're here because of him." The entire auditorium fell silent. Gasps, whispers, shock. Marcus stood still, stunned. He hadn't seen these men in years. They had been his brothers in arms, bonded by blood, battle, and sacrifice. He had never told anyone, not even Jalen, that these men would be attending. From the stage, the school principal, a blonde woman in her 50s, descended the stairs quickly, clearly shaken. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she approached the group. She looked at Marcus, then the guards. "Mr. Blackwell is a guest of honor. He is the father of our top graduate, and you just insulted him in front of the entire school." She turned to the guards and added, "Stand down, now." The guards, pale and speechless, stepped back. Then something incredible happened. One by one, guests in the crowd began to stand. They clapped softly at first, then louder. The clapping swelled into thunderous applause. The sound filled every corner of the hall. It was no longer about graduation. It was about respect. It was about redemption. Marcus remained still, his face unreadable. His eyes scanned the room, unsure how to react. He hadn't come to be praised. But somehow, after a lifetime of sacrifice, this moment finally acknowledged his worth. And his son hadn't even walked the stage yet. The applause still echoed through the graduation hall as Marcus Blackwell was led to a front row seat, now reclassified as an honored guest. His back straightened slightly, but his chest still felt heavy. He hadn't come here seeking recognition. He didn't wear his medals. He didn't brag about his past. All he wanted was to sit quietly, watch his son walk the stage, and hand him a bouquet of flowers when it was over. But now the entire auditorium had witnessed what almost happened, how close he was to being thrown out of his son's milestone moment, and how four brothers from a distant battlefield had stood for him when no one else did. Behind Marcus, the four former SEALs took their seats again, quietly like sentinels. They didn't need attention. Their presence had already said more than words ever could. On stage, Principal Simmons, a blonde woman in her early 50s, stepped up to the microphone. Her voice, usually composed and warm, now carried a slight tremble. Before we continue, I owe someone in this room a sincere apology. And not just on behalf of this institution, but as a mother and as an American. Sergeant Marcus Blackwell is more than just a father attending today's ceremony. He is a man who has sacrificed more than most of us will ever understand. We are honored to have him here. The crowd rose again. This time the clapping felt deeper, less like a reflex, more like a reckoning. Marcus nodded silently, never lifting his hand. He didn't smile. His jaw was clenched. His mind was still reeling, not from anger, but from the sheer gravity of what had almost been taken from him. If he had walked out, if no one had stood up, would Jalen have seen that moment? Would his son have carried that hurt forever? Meanwhile, backstage, Jalen Blackwell stood frozen in line among a sea of graduates. His mind had stopped processing the formal order of names, the speeches, the music. All he saw was his father alone being pointed at by two guards. And then, like a miracle, the men in black suits rising. His father wasn't just a Marine. He was that Marine, the one those elite soldiers came back for. A friend leaned over and whispered, "Was that your dad?" Jalen nodded. For the first time, he didn't downplay it. He didn't shrug like he usually did when someone mentioned his father's service. He stood taller. "Yeah," he said, "that's my dad." A few rows up, a mother leaned to her son and asked, "Why would they do that to him?" No one had an answer, but everyone understood what had just happened. Principal Simmons resumed the ceremony, but the energy had shifted. The auditorium wasn't just filled with celebration. Now it hummed with reverence. Names were called. Students walked the stage. One by one, they accepted diplomas, some posing for photos, some giving quick nods to the crowd. Then it came. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jalen Marcus Blackwell, Honor Graduate Class of Washington Memorial 2025. The name rang out. The entire audience turned. Jalen walked slowly, gracefully toward the stage. He didn't wave. He didn't smile at the crowd. His eyes were locked on the first row on his father. Marcus stood as Jalen ascended the steps. And when Jalen reached the center of the stage, holding the diploma in one hand, he turned to the crowd and raised it high. Then in a voice loud and clear, he said, "This is for my father, Sergeant Marcus Blackwell, a real hero." The room exploded. Students stood. Parents wiped tears. Even faculty members placed hands over their hearts. Marcus sat down slowly, his eyes brimming. His hands shook, not from weakness, but from something else. The feeling of being seen, not just as a veteran, not just as a black man, but as a father, as a man who had given all he had for this country and for this moment. The four SEALs behind him leaned forward. One of them placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You raised a good one," he said. Marcus nodded, still speechless. In that moment, a lifetime of silence, of being overlooked, of enduring, of holding his tongue melted away. Jalen walked off the stage and straight into his father's arms. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The embrace said it all. As Jalen stepped down from the stage, diploma in hand, he didn't head back to his row of graduating classmates. Instead, he walked straight toward the front, past stunned teachers and clapping parents, directly to the first row where his father stood waiting. Marcus didn't speak. He just opened his arms, and Jalen, without hesitation, collapsed into them. The embrace wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it stopped time. For 1 second, in the middle of the most important day of his young life, Jalen wasn't a top graduate or a valedictorian or a rising college student. He was a son wrapped in the arms of a father who had fought too many battles both on foreign soil and on American streets. Jalen whispered into his father's ear, voice cracking. You always told me to walk with pride. Today, you gave me that pride. Marcus's throat tightened. He patted his son's back once, twice. Words didn't come easy when your whole life had been spent holding them in. But this moment was worth more than medals. Behind them, the four former Navy SEALs watched in silence. Their names were Jason Hall, Raul Ortega, Kendrick, Kenny Moore, and William Drake. Though their uniforms were long retired, their loyalty was as sharp as ever. They had planned to surprise Marcus today, showing up discreetly as a gesture of brotherhood. None of them expected to become involved, but when they saw him being escorted like a criminal, they knew they couldn't remain silent. Jason leaned over to Kenny. I still remember the day Marcus dragged me out of that ditch in Kandahar with shrapnel in both legs. If he hadn't, Kenny interrupted, none of us would be here. Raul, the most soft-spoken among them, added, and now his own country tries to remove him from his son's graduation. William, the eldest of the group and Marcus's former commanding officer, didn't say a word, but his jaw clenched tightly and his eyes never left Marcus. On the stage, the ceremony moved on, but it was clear that something had shifted. Principal Simmons, trying to maintain decorum, resumed calling names, though her voice now carried extra reverence. Several parents approached the SEALs and Marcus afterward, some to apologize, others simply to say thank you. In the back of the hall, the two security guards who had attempted to remove Marcus now stood near the exit, visibly shaken. One of them muttered to the other, we didn't know who he was. But that was the point. They hadn't cared to know. Later that afternoon, after the ceremony had ended and the crowd began to thin out, Marcus and Jalen stepped outside together into the golden light of a Virginia summer afternoon. The SEALs followed, walking slowly like shadows returning to the light. Marcus turned to them, finally breaking his silence. I don't know what to say. William stepped forward first. You don't have to say anything. You showed up for us back then. We just returned the favor. Kenny added with a half smile. You didn't think we'd miss your boy's graduation, did you? Marcus chuckled softly, the first time he had smiled all day. Honestly, I didn't even think you remembered I had a son. Jason put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. We remember everything, brother. Every firefight, every night patrol. Every picture of Jalen you showed us when we were pinned in that base with no electricity and 2 cans of beans. You raised him right. Jalen stood nearby, watching the men exchange nods and inside jokes like long-lost family. For a moment, he saw his father not just as a dad, but as someone with a history deeper than any textbook he'd read. These weren't just war buddies. These were men who had lived, bled, and survived together. Raul finally asked, What's next for you, Marcus? Marcus looked down at his son, then back at the SEALs. I think it's time to stop fighting battles, time to live. And then with a mix of humor and pride, he added, maybe teach this young man how to fix his own car before college. They laughed. Not the empty kind, but the laughter of men who had witnessed too much and survived just enough. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the 5 men stood in a quiet circle in front of the school. No cameras, no crowds, just 4 brothers and a father. Before parting ways, each SEAL gave Jalen a firm handshake, a hug, or a quiet word of encouragement. William looked him square in the eye and said, Make your father proud, but more than that, make yourself proud. Jalen nodded, blinking back emotion. And then as suddenly as they had appeared, the SEALs disappeared into separate cars, their work here done. No medals awarded, no speeches needed, just a promise honored. Marcus and Jalen walked back to their own car. The flowers were still fresh in Marcus's hand, and in the other a diploma dedicated by a son to a father who never asked for thanks but finally received it. The next morning the story had spread. Not from any news station, not from a reporter with a microphone. It began with whispers passed from student to parent, from teacher to neighbor. By noon, it was all over the small town's social media feeds. Marine almost removed from son's graduation until 4 Navy SEALs stood up for him. And while the post didn't mention names, those who were there knew. Some tried to replay the scene in words. Others simply posted a photo someone had discreetly captured Marcus, hugging Jalen, surrounded by the men in suits with the afternoon sun, casting long golden shadows across the school courtyard. No caption was needed. For the students of Washington Memorial High, the graduation had been unforgettable. But not because of the speeches or the decorations or even the diplomas. It was unforgettable because it revealed something real, something deeper than school spirit or valedictorian titles. That afternoon, Principal Simmons sat alone in her office rewatching the security footage. She watched the moment when Marcus first entered, the precise second the guards approached, and the exact point when the four men in black stood up. She paused there, frame by frame. Her chest tightened. How many others have we treated like this over the years? How many never had someone to speak up for them? She picked up her phone and dialed a number. Mr. Blackwell. This is Principal Simmons. I know yesterday was overwhelming, but I'd like to meet with you and your son if you're willing. There's something I'd like to do. 2 days later, Marcus and Jalen arrived back at the school, not as attendees, but as guests of honor. The auditorium was quiet empty this time, but something new hung above the stage. A freshly printed banner, white and bold. Integrity is earned, honor is remembered. And beneath it, Sergeant Marcus Blackwell, honoring a lifetime of service. Principal Simmons met them at the door. She looked nervous, as if worried they wouldn't accept her olive branch. I don't expect you to forgive us, she said softly. But I can't let the world forget what happened either. Marcus nodded. He didn't need a plaque, but he understood something now. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about making sure the next father didn't have to explain why he wasn't allowed to see his child succeed. The school organized a small assembly the following week, bringing in seniors and juniors to hear Marcus speak. He was hesitant at first, but Jalen had nudged him gently that morning. They need to hear from you, Dad, not just about what happened, but about why it happens. So Marcus stood before them, hundreds of students in bleachers, and told his story. Not just the graduation day, but everything before it. The patrols, the sacrifices, the loneliness, the pride, the scars, the days of coming home and feeling invisible, the constant fear of being misunderstood, judged, dismissed. And then the moment it all turned. Respect doesn't always come when you expect it, he told them, his voice steady. Sometimes it comes when you least expect it, and from people who remember what others forget. He paused, locking eyes with a row of students near the back. Don't be the one who watches someone get pushed out of the room. Be the one who stands, even if it's uncomfortable, even if no one else is moving, because that one decision might change someone's life. There was silence, then thunderous applause. After the assembly, a student, a white girl with a military dad, came up and said, I never really asked my father what he went through. I think I will tonight. And a young black boy added, when I grow up, I want to be like you. Marcus smiled. No, be better. Back home that night, Marcus sat on the porch while Jalen packed for college. The house was quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves. Jalen came out carrying a small box. Hey, Dad, he said, sitting next to him. I found your medals in the attic. Why'd you hide them? Marcus chuckled. Because they never felt like they mattered. Jalen held one up to the light. They do now. The two sat in silence for a while. Then Marcus finally spoke. You know, son, when those guards pointed at me, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. Tired of proving myself. Tired of being questioned. But you, when you raised that diploma, you erased years of that weight. In 10 seconds. Jalen looked at his father, eyes shining. I was just telling the truth. Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Truth is the most powerful thing we have. Never forget that. As night fell and the stars blinked awake, father and son sat side by side, no longer just Marine and graduate. They were two men connected by something more profound than rank, ceremony, or applause. Dignity reclaimed through love, respect, and the courage to stand. 3 days after the graduation, Marcus sat in the back booth of a small diner off Route 58. One of those places with chipped tabletops, faded ketchup bottles, and ceiling fans that spun too slowly. The booth creaked as he shifted, sipping his black coffee, flipping through a local newspaper. He wasn't looking for recognition. He never did. But there it was, page 5, lower corner. A grainy photo of Jalen holding up his diploma with Marcus in the frame, blurry but unmistakable. The headline read, A graduation moment goes viral. Veterans step in to defend Marine father. Marcus set the paper down, half shaking his head. It had already begun to spread his face, his story, his name. Not because he wanted it, but because someone with a phone had posted the video. Because people who'd seen injustice wanted the world to witness what fairness looked like when brave men stood up. His phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Is this Sergeant Marcus Blackwell? Speaking. This is Major Helen Russo from the Department of Veterans Affairs. First, I want to say thank you. Second, would you be willing to speak at our national conference next month? We believe your story is something every veteran, every family, and every citizen needs to hear. Marcus didn't know what to say. Across town, Jalen sat with his mom, Marcus's ex-wife, on the living room floor. showing her the now viral video for the 10th time. She was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice cracking. He never told me he saved those men. Jalen smiled. He didn't even tell me. But they did. That night, while checking his messages, Jalen saw an alert. Someone had tagged him in a thread, dozens of messages, people from all over the country. This story made me call my dad for the first time in 3 years. This is what a real man looks like. I want to be like Jalen when I grow up. And one message stood out. Dear Jalen, I'm 14, black, and my dad left when I was 2. But watching you raise that diploma for yours gave me hope I never had. Thank you. Jalen stared at the screen. He wasn't trying to inspire. He just spoke from the heart. He clicked reply. You're not alone, brother. Stand tall anyway. Meanwhile, at Washington Memorial High, something unprecedented was happening. The school board called an emergency meeting not because of discipline or testing scores, but because parents, students, and even former alumni had written over 200 letters to the administration. Letters demanding change, demanding training, demanding that what happened to Marcus would never happen again to anyone. Principal Simmons stood at the podium that night, reading aloud. We are not here to repair Marcus Blackwell's reputation. He never lost it. We are here to confront the systems that failed to see it in the first place. The room erupted in applause. One board member, a retired Army officer, stood and spoke. We salute soldiers when they're in uniform, but we forget their value when they're wearing jeans and a t-shirt. That ends now. A motion was passed to implement bias awareness training for all security staff and administrators. Another motion passed to rename the school's Veterans Scholarship to the Marcus Blackwell Honor Grant. The following week, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium in D.C., invited by the VA to deliver the keynote address. The room was filled with veteran students, policymakers, men and women from every branch of service, from every state. His image now appeared on the large screen behind the stage, standing with Jalen and the 4 SEALs. He stepped up to the podium, no notes, no teleprompter, just his story. I didn't come here to talk about myself. I came here to talk about what happens when good people stay quiet. I came here because sometimes, even after serving your country, you still have to fight to be seen. The room was silent, hanging on every word. I want to thank the 4 men who stood beside me. But I also want to ask everyone here, who are you standing up for when no one's looking? Are you waiting for injustice to knock on your own door before you react? Or will you stand when it knocks on someone else's? He paused, eyes sharp. Honor doesn't come from medals, it comes from moments. As he stepped back, the entire room rose, every person, every veteran, every staffer. The applause went on for over a minute. That night, Marcus returned home and found Jalen in the kitchen packing late-night snacks for his dorm move. Nice speech, Jalen said, smirking. Didn't even stutter. Marcus chuckled. Guess I'm not as rusty as I thought. They sat at the table again, quiet for a beat. Then Jalen asked something unexpected. Do you ever regret serving? Marcus looked at him, eyes distant. Not for 1 second. Jalen nodded. Even after what happened? Marcus leaned forward, voice calm. Especially after what happened. Because I didn't fight for perfection. I fought for the chance to make it better. And as he spoke, Jalen realized something. His father wasn't just a soldier of war. He was now a soldier of change. Officer Brent McCabe sat in the break room of the school security office, staring blankly at the black and white photo posted on the bulletin board. It was a snapshot of the graduation ceremony, specifically the moment he had confronted Marcus Blackwell, pointing a finger at him. He had no idea the camera had captured it, but the angle was clear, so was his face. And so was the expression on Marcus's. Regret, humiliation, pain, all preserved in a single image. The room was quiet. His partner, Officer Danny Torres, leaned on the table beside him, flipping a stress ball in his hand. I haven't slept since that day, Torres muttered. I keep replaying it in my head, like if we had just asked one more question, if we had just listened instead of followed orders. Brent didn't respond. His mind was heavy. Not with guilt alone, but confusion. He had thought they were doing the right thing. A suspicious report, a protocol, a man who looked out of place. But now, Sorno, that suspicious man had been on national television. That man had been invited to the White House. That man had served more tours than Brent had years on the job. And what had he done? He had tried to remove him in front of his son. Principal Simmons had offered to meet them in private. No press, no cameras, just conversation. So now, 2 days later, Brent and Danny stood outside her office, hands clenched, wondering what kind of confrontation was waiting for them inside. But when the door opened, Marcus Blackwell was there, sitting calmly across from the principal's desk. wearing the same black polo shirt he'd worn to graduation, the very one Brent had told him to leave in. He stood when they entered. Brent froze. "Mr. Blackwell, Marcus held up his hand gently. "Let me go first." Brent sat down slowly. Marcus looked at them, not angrily, not smugly, just steady. "I've been in situations where hesitation got people killed. I know what it's like to follow orders. I also know what it's like to lose someone because you didn't stop and think." He paused. "You didn't know who I was. That's fine. I didn't expect a red carpet, but you didn't ask. And that's where the harm lives, not in action, but in assumption." The room was quiet. Brent swallowed hard. "We were wrong. There's no excuse." Marcus didn't say, "I forgive you." He didn't say it's okay. He said something better. "Use it. Don't just carry the shame. Carry the change." That sentence stuck. As the guards left, Brent knew his job had changed. The uniform, the badge, the radio, they meant nothing if his eyes weren't open. From that day forward, he vowed never again would he mistake quiet dignity for threat. Elsewhere, the four SEALs who had stood for Marcus began receiving calls of their own. Some were from old commanders, some from strangers, and one from the Department of Defense inviting them to speak on unity and racial bias in a joint leadership summit. Jason Hall, the silver-haired SEAL with the scar, told the story best. Not just of Marcus, but of the thousands of veterans who came home invisible. At the summit, he stood at the podium and said, "There's this myth in America that when the uniform comes off, you become civilian again. But some of us never take the battlefield out of our bodies. And when we see one of our own being pushed aside in peace after surviving hell and war, we're not just witnessing disrespect, we're witnessing betrayal." His words were quoted in 5 national newspapers the next morning. Jalen, now preparing for college, received a call from a youth organization in Atlanta. They wanted him to speak to young boys growing up without fathers. Not because Jalen had the perfect answers, but because he had seen what presence looks like. Because he had lifted the name of a man who stayed. He was nervous. He'd never spoken publicly before. But when he entered the rec center that weekend, over 80 young boys, mostly black, stood up and clapped like he was a hero. They didn't care he was 18. They saw in him something they rarely saw in the news. A young man who loved his father out loud. And Jalen began to realize his diploma wasn't just a paper. It was a megaphone. And he was going to use it. Later that month, Marcus received one final letter, this time handwritten. No email, no postage stamp. It had been slid under his door. The handwriting was shaky. "Mr. Blackwell, my name is Edward Collings. I'm 83. I served in Korea. I watched your story on TV. I haven't spoken to anyone in years, not even my daughter. But after seeing your son raise that diploma, I called her. We're having dinner Friday. Thank you for reminding me that men like us still have voices." Marcus folded the letter slowly, then picked up the phone. He dialed Jalen's number and said simply, "You ready to change the world, son?" Jalen's voice came back through the line, steady and smiling. "Already started." 2 weeks after the speech in D.C., Marcus sat in his living room reading a book he hadn't touched in years. His glasses slipped low on his nose as sunlight filtered through the blinds. Outside, Jalen was washing the car, humming some track Marcus didn't recognize, something modern, upbeat, full of possibility. The phone rang again. He almost didn't answer it. Most calls these days were media requests, interviews, book agents, or random strangers offering praise, advice, or both. He didn't mind it, but it felt surreal, like his life had been picked up and moved to a different orbit, one he never asked to enter. He picked up the receiver, Marcus speaking. The voice on the other end was calm, formal. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm calling on behalf of the Office of the President of the United States. We would like to formally invite you and your son to a recognition ceremony at the White House next Thursday. The President would like to thank you personally for your service and your story." Marcus leaned back in the chair, blinking. "Is this a joke?" "No, sir. We will send over a formal letter this afternoon. The President watched your address in D.C. He was moved." Marcus said nothing for a moment. "We would be honored if you accepted." Marcus exhaled quietly. "I'll ask my son." On Thursday, the marble halls of the White House gleamed under late morning light. Jalen walked slightly behind his father, wearing a new suit he had borrowed from his uncle. Marcus wore his dress, blues pressed and precise, the medals pinned across his chest catching flecks of sun like stars. He hadn't worn this uniform in years. He never thought he would again. But today wasn't about him. It was about what he represented. A Marine who never sought glory. A father who almost missed the most important moment of his son's life. A man who was nearly erased from the room, but stayed. Secret Service agents guided them through security, then to the East Room. Journalists, veterans, and cabinet members filled the space, and then the president entered. The applause was brief but reverent. This wasn't a press stunt. This wasn't politics. It was recognition, raw, overdue, and deeply earned. The president, a veteran himself, walked directly to Marcus, shook his hand firmly, then did something unexpected. He saluted, not as a formality, but as a man salutes another soldier who held the line when others faltered. Sergeant Blackwell, the president, said into the mic, "You reminded this country what honor looks like when the cameras aren't rolling. You stood with quiet strength in a moment that could have broken you, and in doing so lifted all of us." Marcus didn't speak immediately. He wasn't one for big speeches, but he stepped to the podium when asked. He looked out over the room then to Jalen in the front row and said, "I never wanted this spotlight. I only wanted to be there for my son. But in being seen, I now understand how many others like me have gone unseen. This isn't about me. It's about every veteran who sits quietly at the back of a room, praying no one asks them to leave." The room fell silent. To every person who's ever been told they don't belong, I see you, and I'll stand with you, just like my brother stood with me. When he finished, the crowd rose to their feet. No cheers, just the unified sound of hands clapping, slow, deliberate, respectful. Later that afternoon, as they left through the South Lawn gates, a staff member handed Marcus a thick envelope. Inside was a sealed proclamation bearing the gold emblem of the United States. It read, "By order of the President, a National Day of Honor, in recognition of unsung heroes who served their nation in silence, to be observed on the third Thursday of June, beginning this year." At the bottom, Marcus's name was mentioned, not as a symbol, but as the spark. Jalen read the letter and turned to his father. "You just made history." Marcus smiled faintly. "No, we did." That evening, they returned home to find dozens of letters waiting, some handwritten, some typed, but all personal. One in particular stood out, written in shaky blue ink on yellowed lined paper. "Dear Mr. Blackwell, my name is Frankie Ruiz. I'm 76 years old. I was a janitor at a high school in Alabama. They made me mop floors during my daughter's graduation because they thought I didn't belong there. I didn't have the courage to fight back. But I watched your son raise that diploma, and I cried. Thank you for standing." Marcus folded the letter and placed it in a box labeled, "To Keep Forever." Jalen sat beside him and whispered, "One day people will write about this, like a chapter in a history book." Marcus nodded. "Then make sure they write it right." The story wasn't over. It was only expanding, in ways no one had planned, through hearts no one expected to touch. It had begun with a single assumption that a man in the wrong seat in the wrong color didn't belong. It ended with a country remembering why he did. The crowd outside the school auditorium stretched down the block, curving past the baseball field and into the parking lot. A sea of faces, young and old, civilians and veterans, stood side by side under the June sun. Some wore military hats. Others held small flags. Many clutched tissues, already emotional before stepping inside. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. The stage bore a simple banner: "Fatherhood, Honor, and Belonging," 3 words that now held deeper meaning for everyone who had heard the name Marcus Blackwell. Jalen sat in the front row beside his father. But this time, Marcus wasn't just an attendee. He was the keynote speaker. The principal who once stood silent during the near removal of Marcus now stood at the podium, her voice firm. There are moments in life that split history in two, before and after. Before we knew his story, and after. Please welcome Sergeant Marcus Blackwell. Applause filled the room. Marcus walked up the steps, not with swagger, but with purpose. His stride calm, his presence commanding. He reached the mic, paused, and looked out across the audience. Then he said, "I came here once before, not to speak, but to witness. I was here for my son. That day was almost taken from me. Not by force, but by assumption." The audience grew still, but I stayed, not because I was strong, but because he was watching. He gestured toward Jalen, whose eyes glistened. "I stayed because one moment of dignity is worth more than a lifetime of fear." Marcus went on, not to preach, but to teach. He spoke about what it meant to raise a son in a world that tried to erase quiet strength. What it meant to fight battles no one clapped for. What it meant to show up, especially when the world tells you not to. "You don't need to be a soldier to stand for someone," he said. "You just need to be a person who refuses to look away." When he finished, no one clapped immediately. They stood, in full silence, a standing ovation without applause, Just presence, unity, respect. Later, as the crowd filtered out, a young girl, barely 10, walked up to Marcus. Her hair was braided, her voice small. "Mr. Blackwell, I want my dad to be like you." He knelt, smiled softly. "Sweetheart, you just remind him who he already is." That evening, the Blackwells sat around their dinner table. No press, no speeches, just home. Jalen scrolled through his phone laughing. "Dad, you're a meme now. There's literally a t-shirt that says, 'I stayed.'" Marcus shook his head amused. "That's ridiculous." But in his heart, he felt something stir. Maybe it wasn't ridiculous. Maybe it was right. Not for fame, not for pride, but because the world had watched and learned that strength didn't always shout. Sometimes it just showed up, sat down and stayed. 3 months later, a bronze plaque was installed outside the auditorium. It didn't mention the incident. It didn't need to. It read, "In honor of every parent who shows up and every child who watches them do it. Dedicated to Sergeant Marcus Blackwell, the man who stayed." And below it, in smaller print, "Courage is presence in the face of dismissal." Jalen framed a photo of that plaque and placed it on his dorm desk at college. On tough days, he looked at it. On lonelier days, he called his dad. And every time Marcus answered, "I'm here." Always. It was a rainy Sunday morning, the kind of rain that made you slow down. Marcus sat by the window, a hot mug of black coffee in hand, watching the droplets streak down the glass. Jalen had left for college 2 weeks prior. The house was quieter now, almost too quiet. A knock came at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, there was no one there. Just a thick envelope sitting on the welcome mat. No return address, no postage. Curious, Marcus picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside, a single handwritten letter. "To the man who stayed, you don't know me, but I know you. I was there that day, not in the front, in the back. One of the guards. I was the one who didn't stop it. I saw it unfold. I saw your face. I heard your son say, 'That's my dad.' And I said nothing. That moment has haunted me every day since. I've worked security for years. We're trained to follow the rules. But sometimes the rules are wrong. That day I didn't lose my job, but I lost something greater, my self-respect." Then I watched what happened next. The seals, the silence, the standing ovation. And you stayed. You didn't yell. You didn't lash out. You just stayed. And because of that, you gave me the courage to walk away from the job and towards something better. I now work for a nonprofit that helps veterans re-enter civilian life. And every time I help a father shake the hand of his son with dignity, I think of you. And thank you for staying. Astrier. Marcus sat down slowly. The rain kept falling outside, but inside something lifted. A burden, perhaps, that he didn't even know he still carried. He folded the letter with quiet care and placed it into a small wooden box on the mantel beside his medals, beside Jalen's graduation photo, beside the framed quote, "Be the man your son thinks you are." And for the first time in weeks, he smiled. That night, he called Jalen. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" Marcus hesitated, then said simply, "You changed more than you know, son. And it's only the beginning." Months had passed. The leaves had turned from green to amber, then fell to the pavement like gentle reminders of how time never stops. Jalen Blackwell was thriving at college, his professors impressed his peers, respectful, and his heart fuller than ever. But it was back home on a cool autumn evening that something happened which would seal the legacy of his father forever. It started with a phone call. Marcus was making dinner when the phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Blackwell," a voice said, "this is Senator Elaine Roth's office. The senator would like to meet with you privately. She says your presence is needed for something important." Marcus paused, suspicious at first, but something about the calm urgency in the assistant's tone made him nod, even though she couldn't see him. "I'll be there," he replied. A week later, Marcus found himself walking into the Capitol. Clean lines, high ceilings, important people whispering in important suits. But Marcus didn't feel out of place, not anymore. He was led to a quiet room, no press, no cameras. Inside, the senator waited, flanked by 3 advisors. Sergeant Marcus Blackwell, she greeted, standing and offering her hand. An honor. Marcus shook it politely. "I'm just a dad." "No," she replied firmly. "You're a symbol." The meeting wasn't political. It was personal. She had read about the incident, had watched the clip online a dozen times. She saw the moment Marcus was asked to leave the SEAL's silent support, the boy who whispered, "That's my dad." That video, she said, was watched more than 48 million times. It changed people. It changed me. She then slid a folder across the table. Marcus opened it. Inside a proposed bill. The STAY Act, Supporting Troops and Advancing Youth. It's a national mentorship initiative, she explained. Veterans mentoring high school seniors, fathers guiding sons, mothers guiding daughters, showing up, staying, standing. Marcus blinked slowly. And you want me to be its face, she said, its heartbeat. I'm not a politician, he replied. Exactly, she said. You're real. He didn't answer right away. But the next morning as the sun rose over D.C., Marcus stood in front of the Lincoln Memorial with Jalen by his side. Reporters watched. Veterans saluted, and Marcus Blackwell stepped forward to a podium, not because he sought recognition, but because the world needed a reminder that dignity, strength, and fatherhood still mattered. I stayed, he told the crowd, because I believed something better would follow. And today, it has. Weeks later, high schools across America posted new banners in gymnasiums and libraries. A simple black and gold quote in all caps. He stayed, so we stood. Jalen visited one of those schools during winter break. A little boy walked up to him shyly and said, "You're the son, right?" The one who said, "That's my dad." Jalen grinned. "Yeah, that was me." "Your dad's awesome." "Yeah," Jalen said, eyes softening. "He is." Back home, Marcus stood in the backyard watching snow gently cover the grass. He didn't need medals, didn't need applause. He had something greater. He had stayed. And because he stayed, the world had stood up, listened, and changed. And deep down, he knew this was never just about one man at one graduation. This was about every father who showed up and every son who watched.